he was alive. He said that they'll come back.
Yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, folks, we're having a conversation about Kos's grandfather, and
That's
absolutely fascinating. So that's the next webinar, Kos.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about him.
Indeed, indeed. Look, let me start by firstly saying that I'm here in the western suburbs of Melbourne on the lands of the Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations. I want to pay my respects to the owners of the land upon which we meet and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and cultures. And this is a particularly important process for those of us working in settlement as we unpack, I suppose, the painful history really and the implications of settlement for the First Peoples of this country. It is an absolute honour. I do occasionally risk being called a stalker with you, Kos, I'm sure, because I probably like or love every single post that I end up reading. But what an honour it is to be able to welcome you to our webinar for the members of the Settlement Council of Australia. And in doing so, we're really hoping to set the scene for our upcoming national conference. Now, let me just give people, because I don't think you're unknown to any of them, and I could read out your bio and go on and on for weeks, but we know you're the co-founder and director of RedBridge Group, one of Australia's most influential insight and strategy firms. Over 25 years of experience, although I was just saying, I don't know how it is that you look so good with so much energy, but politics, communications, analytics, you obviously bring a deeply grounded understanding of community attitudes, generational issues, identity, migration, and how all of these things intersect in the real world. You specialise in combining rigorous data and polling with narrative insight, and this is where it's particularly useful to us, Kos, helping organisations, member organisations like ours, really be able to anticipate the future and not only just respond to what the current sort of is. So thank you. I know that you speak directly to the core mission at the Settlement Council of Australia. Your lived experience is always at the heart of your work. And can I say personally, having known you now for some time, that your commitment to community and grassroots in particular is inspiring. You've offered to do this for us when you are so busy. So I can't tell you how important it is for us. We know out there, we were having the conversation just before you all came on to the virtual room, but it is a shifting political and social terrain, and the kind of data that you're able to share with us, I know will really help us work through our own strategies and our own responses. So welcome everybody. It's great to see so many of you, and I know that there were many others that wanted to attend but were not able to. We will be recording the session and sharing it with each of you again if you wanted to have another look, because there's so much in what Kos says that I'm constantly going back to some of the key points that you raised. We will hear from you, Kos, and then we will open it up to questions, a real opportunity for us. So thank you again for joining us, for being so generous in doing this. And I know it will be a powerful and provocative discussion. So over to you, Kos Samaras.
Thank you, Marie, for those very kind words. I will share a PowerPoint if you just bear with me. Just make sure I've got the right one. Just bear with me. I am struggling to find the file that I'm trying to share.
We will absolutely bear with you. And I'm hoping I'll just take up the opportunity. If there's anyone who is online at the moment and hasn't registered for the national conference, you better do it now, because it promises to be absolutely wild. So please join us at the Sunshine Coast on the 19th to the 21st. Kos, you found it. Over to you.
I found it. That's great.
Great.
Right. So you can all see that. It's all good. Just going to put it into presentation mode. Okay, so what I want to do is take you through all of what we're seeing from a data perspective and how the country's changing, how the country has changed, and why a lot of what we see on our, whether it's on TV or on our mobile devices and online, in terms of how politics expresses itself, is to a certain extent quite disconnected from the reality of what this country is and where it's heading. A couple of very obvious points here, right? I mean, whenever the media try to compare us to, let's say, the US, we're very different. We're effectively a democracy that has evolved in a fairly peaceful environment. We've not had civil wars. We haven't had that sort of extreme violence across society like we've seen in the US over many, many decades, actually. So we're a structurally very different culture. And of course, the thing that's about this country is migration, and particularly over the last 80 years, but I would say especially over the last 20 odd years, where this country has changed drastically. And it's done that in a number of areas, and I'll walk you through how that's happened. Obviously, the first point out that you could see there, we're the most diverse that we've ever been in terms of people born overseas since 1891. So there was a decline after 1891 all the way down to 1947. And then it started to pick up a bit, but it really has accelerated in a very big way up until 2025, over the last 20 odd years. We have now about 30 odd % of Australians that are born overseas. We have 44% of Australians that are born overseas in Melbourne and Sydney to a certain extent. That's average. It fluctuates here and there. These are very significant numbers. And half of most Australians living in big urban centres have migrant parents. We also have a rapidly changing electorate when it comes to the education composition of it all. So really good contrast is the tertiary qualification levels of baby boomer women versus millennial women. Baby boom women, it's in the teens. Millennial women, it's now over 50%. So again, that's a drastic difference between these two generations. That's important because what we do know also is that if you've got a university degree, you're more likely to be voting for the parties of the left in this country. The other big thing, which I keep talking about to the media and everyone else, is our compulsory voting system. We are drastically different to the countries that we compare ourselves with, which is the UK and the US on a regular basis. And this is why also those who try to import the politics that work over there or tend to resonate over there into this country find themselves, in a lot of trouble, because the centre, which I'll talk about in this presentation, is quite impactful when it comes to election results. And the centre in 2025 is actually centre-left. And it's largely people under the age of 50 years of age, and it's incredibly diverse. We're one of the most urbanized countries in the world, right? So again, we're going to use the US and the UK as an example. Very significant chunks of their population are outside of their large cities. We're not that country. We have in excess of 80+% of our country is urbanized. In Melbourne, in excess of 80% of Victoria's population lives in Melbourne. Sydney is very similar, a little bit lower. Perth, 80%, and so on and so on. The only state where we don't see that dynamic is in Queensland, where even there, 45% of that state's population is in Brisbane, but that's changing. So that's a quick snapshot of what our country looks like right now. And of course, we've got to think about what has actually stimulated that change. So the first undercurrent is migration, which all of you will be very acutely aware of. We've had two very significant waves. Obviously, the post-Second World War European migration, which was about 2.2 million migrants, give or take. And then obviously we've had then migration from Vietnam, from Lebanon during the Civil War. We've had other diasporas arrive here during that period, all the way up to the year 2000. Then Howard changed our migration policy, and he, from an emphasis of family reunion to skilled migration, and triggered a very significant change in trajectory of the types of people that were going to migrate to this country. And they were obviously largely from the Chinese and Australian diasporas, Chinese and Indian Australian diasporas. And that number that I've got there, that's going to continue to increase. So in fact, in Victoria, at the close of this decade, we're probably going to have about 1 million Chinese and Indian Australians enrolled to vote in Victoria at the close of this decade. So if you're mucking up the politics of these communities, but also more broadly of diverse Australians, you're going to be in a bit of bother in the two largest cities in the country, but also increasingly in other cities as well. The other point I want to talk about is the current coalition support is pretty low. Its support amongst diverse Australians is incredibly low. It only has 2 out of the top 50 most diverse electorates in the country. It only holds 8 to 10. Sometimes the definition of what is an urban seat changes, but it's between 8 to 10 of all urban seats in the country. We have about 88 to 90 of them in this country. Now, if you know, going back to the previous slide, if you're looking at a country which is highly urbanized and you're only securing a fraction of that politically, you're going to be in deep trouble. So they hold 2 seats in Melbourne, they hold 3 in Sydney that are urban, and 2 of those are increasingly becoming diverse. So that includes Alex Hawke's electorate of Mitchell, which is, I think, going to be the next seat that the Labor camp is going to target at the next election. And if they continue the current narrative that they are fixated on, they will lose seats like Mitchell. Because what we are picking up in our research amongst diverse Australians is that they are feeling targeted and victimised by the conservative forces in this country right now. And I can talk a little bit about that later on. The other thing that has changed in this country is the nature of work. So we've basically been transformed from a manufacturing agrarian economy to one that is obviously focused around services and the knowledge economy. That's obviously triggered what we will define as sort of gentrification of Australia. And you could see that there's that stark sort of difference between university education levels between the 1970s and 2025, and obviously, as I touched on, the age disparity, so the qualifications or university degree qualifications of women between those 2 generations we spoke about. Again, these Australians, young professionals, those working in health, education, public servants, they are largely living in our big urban centres. They coexist with many diverse Australians. They are in themselves diverse Australians. And they are living in significant numbers in electorates which we saw the coalition begin to lose in 2019. So they won that election, but they had swings against them in all the electorates which have 2 traits: diversity and high levels of education and youth. It's all connected, really. And then in 2022, we saw that writ large, with the coalition basically losing to both Labor and the Teals these electorates. For Labor, it was mainly the urban diverse electorates of Bennelong, Reid, and then of course they doubled down on their approach, and then lost Menzies, Deakin, Aston, these sort of electorates, again, very diverse in Melbourne, particularly having high numbers of Chinese Australians that reside in them. And the seats they've lost to the Teals are largely young, increasingly becoming young, urbanised, highly educated local economies. And if you think about some of these electorates, university campuses around these electorates, like in Kooyong, for example, Swinburne University has gone from being just a campus to now largely a university that has completely transformed that part of Melbourne. And that attracts not only a larger number of younger people to that part, but when they graduate, they tend to stick around. Right. And so then, of course, the private sector responds to that, and they build homes and apartments to suit that market. And we see that now right across the entire country. So you're looking at Kooyong, you go to Sydney, where around Bennelong and Reid, anywhere where there's a large university campus, we have seen a drastic change of the demography of that particular part of Australia. So when we speak to people around how they identify themselves, and this is a sample of about 1,000 people, you could see that it's quite a mixed bag. There's a large chunk that would identify as moderate. There's a large chunk that collectively, from centre left all the way up to socialist, will be defining themselves as left wing. Then there's, of course, a relatively minor but not insignificant number of people who consider themselves centre-right conservative, and then a very large number who are not willing to identify with any of those particular labels that we offer them. Now, that middle ground and those other individuals are the ones who vote at this election. In the US and the UK, they don't turn up. So people who are largely not interested in politics, largely won't necessarily define themselves left or right, tend to stay home. And so you have, in those other countries, the politics of the fringes matter a lot more. So issues like immigration matter a lot more in those countries. In this country, it's different. People in the centre expect a much more moderate response to some of these issues that are clearly polarised in those other countries I've been talking about. So what this does is that our compulsory electoral system rewards moderate, broad-based approaches. It reduces volatility. It rewards centralist policies, and it punishes extreme politics. So we could see that in the last federal election, elements of the Greens suffered because they were perceived by older progressive millennials as being too radical, and they were punished at the ballot box. That's changing because younger Australians, particularly Gen Z, are very big supporters of the Greens. And we can talk about why, but that is something that's coming down the pipeline. I'll give you a quick snapshot on Generation Z. 45% of Generation Z women at the moment in our surveys are planning to vote Green across the entire country. So it's not geographically confined to the big cities, it's everywhere. The males, it's a little bit different. 40-odd% of them are planning to vote Labor. About 25% are planning to vote Green. Again, very strong statistical evidence that the next generation that's coming through at the moment, 18 to 28-year-olds are classified as Gen Z. There's still another 5 years of Gen Z to enrol to vote. So we've probably got another 1.4 million of them to come. And they are very bad news for conservative politics in this country. They are going to really upend the political system, but also it is something that the Labor camp should pay very close attention to, because they will put pressure on them from a left-wing perspective. When I talk to economists and investors, and this is about trying to change their view of the world, we say to them, you've got to be acutely aware that your market, your political market, is not the market that you're used to. So we try to recruit the private sector into this political paradigm by explaining to them that they are looking at a country that is drastically different to the US and the UK, and they have to be really sensitive to that, because if they're not, you can just go and speak to Coles and Woolworths and ask them what that looks like. They become basically a political piñata as a result of not managing their social license, and they've got themselves in deep trouble. You could see that previous graph that I had, which was current federal voting intentions, and I've overlaid it now, and you could see that Labor's base is quite diverse, but so is the coalitions, but not as much. And you can see how people who identify themselves as right-wing, a portion of them are voting Labor. Very significant numbers of moderates are voting for the Labor camp. And again, those who don't want to identify with anyone tend to side with the parties of the left. And you can see that two-party preferred vote of 53. So, as I touched on before, we're dealing with a highly urbanised country. 1 in 5 Australians live in Sydney and Melbourne. That matters for this country going forward. Historically, Queensland was always the swing state when it came to federal elections. It's now Melbourne and Sydney. If you think about the sort of seats that were lost in 2022, and then coupled with some seats that the coalition lost again in 2025, they've all largely been in Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. And Perth's a separate story, which does require some attention, because what's going on in Perth is a version of what's been happening in Sydney and Melbourne for some time. Perth is becoming more diverse and is starting to behave a lot more like the two big cities as well. Hence why we'll see the political consequences for the coalition. And you think about the absolute massive problem that Conservatives have got. 7 out of the 8 seats held by former Liberal leaders have been lost since 2022. So you think about Bennelong, Wentworth, Warringah. These were all seats held by coalition leaders. These are seats that the coalition used to view as super safe and the sort of seats you put your future leaders in. They're gone. So that's the drastic hit that they've actually had to absorb. And you could see here with our previous poll that we just published, the generational breakdowns here, the urban breakdown. You could see that Labor does really, really well in inner and outer metropolitan areas, holds its own provincial centres, and really the only constituencies Conservative politics are holding their ground in is rural and baby boomers. Importantly, those Australians are speaking another language at home. You could see there 65% two-party preferred for Labor. The primary vote is 45%. It is in excess of 50% in the two largest diasporas that I mentioned, which is the Chinese and Indian diaspora. And it is, I think, going to continue to grow for the Labor camp. Flip side, you could see there with Gen Z in the Green vote, very significant in support. And One Nation, they've been in the news recently, but you could see where they get much of their support. Provincial rural areas, And then you look at the generations, it's largely Gen X and baby boomers. So it's basically Gen X and baby boomers in provincial and rural areas. That's where most of One Nation support sits. There's obviously a bit of it elsewhere, but when we talk about electoral impact, that's where it sits. The impact of all of this is the major party vote is on the decline. And, you know, back in 1996, the non-major party vote was 14%. It was still the same in 2007, and then it started to drop. There's a couple of things that have been going on then since. Obviously, our housing market's gotten worse, but those two generations I've been talking about, millennial Gen Z, began to enroll, millennials at first, obviously, at around 2004 onwards. And what we do know about the other vote is 72% of it is made up of 18 to 49-year-olds, which is largely Gen Z and millennial and young Gen Xers. So those choosing to vote for other parties, largely parties of the left, are skewing very significantly towards younger generations. You could see we've given you a breakdown there of the major party support. So only 51% of Gen Z supported the major parties at the last election. Millennial was 64, Gen X 67. You could see baby boomers there at 80%. And why the baby boom generation is so drastically different to everyone else. We expect, even amongst Gen X, that number to drop at the next election. So Labor's, what we do know about the major party is what we call a sort of major party elasticity. So historically, for those of you who do follow politics, we've always had this paradigm where, you know, the coalition will win, it'll have a couple of terms or 3 terms, and then the other side takes over. And the baby boomer generation in particular would, you know, a group of them will switch over, and we used to call them swinging voters. In 2025, what we are seeing is more of a situation where the major parties bleed to their flanks. So we don't see much swapping of votes. There is a bit of it, but there isn't as much as the major parties would like between their two brands. So on the Labor side, they are increasingly going to become under pressure by particularly Generation Z versus the Greens. The outer urban vote is going to continue to fragment to minor parties and independents, as we see a bit of that at the last federal election. They have a structural low floor, so their primary vote at the last federal election was 34, and they are going to rely on that other vote a lot more in the years to come. And they do have cultural vulnerabilities within particularly urban diasporas as well, and they manifest towards independents and Greens even. Coalition, it has a massive urban problem, as I touched on. It's got a problem it's got a massive problem with regards to urban gentrification, that is with university-educated Australians. It's bleeding to One Nation and other populist parties to its right flank. And baby boomers, older baby boomers now in their late 70s and 80s, they're unfortunately going to start passing away. And as this is their coalition's main Praetorian Guard when it comes to electoral politics, and it's going to continue to decrease in number. To give you a snapshot, the baby boomer, an older Australian cohort, when Tony Abbott won, was in excess of 60% in 2013. At the next election, it'll be down to 25. So that's a pretty significant change. The other thing that we're seeing is the political rift with Gen Z and diverse Australians with regards to the coalition. Only 13% of Generation Z women are planning to vote for the coalition at the moment. And then support for the coalition amongst diverse Australians is also in the low 20s. When we skew that towards Generation Z, very similar numbers in the mid-teens. So that's the presentation. I can stop sharing. We can have a chat.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kos. Can I suggest that people use the chat function if they do have questions, or if you want to raise your hand? But can I really ask that we don't not sort of get into very long commentaries, that we keep it very specific to the question, because obviously we have an important opportunity here to hear from Kos and the data that he's generating. I did notice that there's a comment there from Dr. Berhan Ahmed around the urbanisation and the rapid spread, the impact of the rapid spread of broadband and digital transformation and opportunity. But of course, unless governments do invest strategically in that regional infrastructure, is this a missed opportunity? And Kos, we're certainly in the settlement sector hearing a lot about regional migration. Are there any insights you can provide? And I know there's a number of regional services represented here today.
Yep. So what we know across the country, but particularly New South Wales and Victoria, is where we do see settlement in regional provincial cities, it's in the big provincial cities. So again, employment opportunity has to be present, services have to be present. It's unlikely, I seriously doubt any significant urban growth to occur in, let's say, Horsham or those smaller regional towns that have, and if you look at their median age, they're aging and are depopulating very quickly. So I don't see the trend of urbanisation reversing. In fact, it will accelerate as we head into the next decade, where the economic situation is going to be just as difficult as it is now. We're clearly not going to go back to the halcyon years of economic prosperity. And I always say this in the corporate sector a lot, that the diet that everyone's used to, which is a level of prosperity which particularly the baby boomer generation enjoyed, was an aberration, not the norm. And so we are going back to a pre-Second World War paradigm.
It's very interesting. A question from Rebecca. Can you paint more of a picture of what's happening in Queensland from a migration perspective, urban versus regional, and any trends that you're seeing over the last 20 years?
Yeah, we published a poll in the Courier Mail 2 weeks ago for southeastern Queensland, and the Labor camp is winning. That's a pretty successful moderate coalition government up there. But they still cannot make inroads into Brisbane in particular, and they're losing ground in some of those sort of peri-urban areas that connect with the Gold Coast. So what's driving that? Diversity. The biggest thing that's changing in that part of the world is it's becoming, Brisbane in particular is becoming more diverse, but also, again, it's that young professional cohort, again, that is growing in number. At the last state election, the LNP should have won seats like Mansfield, which historically have been bellwether of urban electorates in Brisbane. Always go with the government. Didn't happen. And the LNP to this day still are electorally struggling. So I would expect that part of the world to be continuously a challenge for conservative politics in this country.
Thank you. Isabel asks, with all those diasporas communities playing a role in the upcoming election, what influence, if any, do you see politically, socially, in terms of the norms that people bring from their countries of origin? Is this likely to influence political candidates or parties? So elements of social conservatism, for example.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, it's, when I was growing up, I grew up in the Greek community. It was socially conservative, but it voted Labor in a very significant way. That's obviously changed as some of us who were born in this country to migrant parents have grown up and started our own families, and we've assimilated and so on, and our voting behaviour is now probably more normal to the general public. But when I say this a lot, when we were growing up, we didn't have a major political parties making us feel not welcome. And that is those of us who are the product of European migration. Different story if you're coming from Asia. So then that gave license to people of my generation to say, well, when they're growing up, to continue having their socially conservative views, but then start voting on aspirational grounds, right? So a lot of them now voting for the Liberal Party. We're not going to see that with socially conservative, diverse Australians. We were doing some interviews with young Sydney residents from the Indian diaspora and from parts of Asia as well, just on a separate project. But we asked them, we always ask at the beginning of all our focus groups, so what's keeping you awake at night? What really worries you right now? Like, what's really giving you a lot of angst about what's going on across our country? Every single one of them raised the rallies and the coalition's anti-immigration narrative. And every single one of them said, yeah, I've got personal views about our intake, but I know, and one young man made the point, and everyone else agreed with him. I know why they're saying it. It isn't about the intake. It's just that they don't like us. And there's going to be a political reckoning, because the fear and anxiety that we picked up in these groups, and there were many of them that we did last week and the week before, we've not seen. And so if there's a debate about just how many of Australia's diverse communities vote for the parties of the left, that's going to be settled in a very big way at the next election, unless something drastically culturally happens with the coalition and they have a come to Jesus moment and start not focusing on these issues. So yeah.
Kos, do you see a difference between the attitudes for refugee and humanitarian entrants as opposed to skilled migrants? Do people understand the difference in migration streams and patterns? Or is everybody a migrant?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? So when you think about, when I was talking about those young professional Australians who are from Anglo-Celtic background, right? They don't have xenophobic views. They would like this country to treat our refugees humanely. They are not anti-immigration. They are very suspect of why this issue suddenly become an issue, and it wasn't an issue before the federal election, right? And so they're going to mark down people politically for it. And so I would say the majority of Australians, yeah, some of them might say our intake's too high or whatever it is, but they know, they have a view about why some are peddling out at the moment. And this is where I think the conservative side of politics is going to be in deep trouble. But yes, I do emphasise, yes, there are mixed views within diverse Australia as to whether our intake is too much. There is probably also an argument to be had with the Commonwealth Government that they have not done enough to explain to the Australian public why the intake is what it is. But there's also probably an acknowledgement that I think this country has to make, and it was touched on at the roundtable discussions, that we bring all these skilled migrants over, but we don't actually have a system that fully captures their skills. The amount of times, I mean, I'm close friends with the federal member for Cornwall, Bassam Abdo. His father was a chemical engineer. No prizes in guessing what jobs he had. He took on when he came over to this country. It wasn't that, was it? Right? So again, that's the biggest criticism we also get within the Australian public when we talk about that school migration program, that it's not, makes it too hard for migrants to actually fully utilise their skills. And I suspect that the left side of politics are going to move rapidly to adjust for that demand.
There's a good question here from our board member Kwame, who leads a service in the Northern Territory. Some interesting questions about population. 30% of the population is Indigenous and about 27% multicultural. So clearly diversity is a significant thing. Curious about what you've noticed, if anything, in the NT.
The Northern Territory, the Country Liberal Party is very diverse, and some of the commentary that I've heard come out of the ranks of that organisation about Jacinta Price's positioning is that she doesn't have support in Darwin, and that she's not popular within those constituencies because the Conservative side of politics in the Territory wants to embrace that diversity. They are, and I think, I think many of their MPs are from diverse backgrounds. So, yeah.
It's an interesting one. Look, there's a couple of questions that I'm going to try and merge into this, but there is an element of kind of being a bit stunned or a bit state of disbelief here. If everything you're saying about the trends, why do the Conservatives keep doubling down then on the same narrative? Like is there something we're missing here? Because all logic would suggest that you pivot. What's going on, and how do those trends impact particularly on the marginal electorates?
We could probably have a 30-minute psychological discussion, right?
Yeah.
Because what is occurring here is also a psychological response from Conservative Australians to a world they cannot accept they live in. 2025 was a bit of a reckoning for them, and what we know with human beings is that we tend to double down on our belief systems when we feel like our belief system is under threat. And so we're seeing a lot of that. But we're also seeing the political consequences. So all the polling since August 31st is about 16 federal polls. I think 4 of ours amongst that 16. We do all the polling now for the Financial Review. All the polling shows one thing: the Labor camp is winning in a landslide. All the polling shows another thing: younger Australians are delivering a 70% two-party preferred vote to Labor. Diverse Australians are delivering 65% two-party preferred to Labor. And that the only thing that's occurring since August the 31st is a fragmentation of the coalition on its right flank to One Nation. And it's something we predicted on that rally day. I made the point on social media. Said, watch this space. What will happen is the coalition's right flank's going to splinter. That's exactly what's happened. When I was in my previous occupation running campaigns for the Labor camp in Victoria, there was a law and order campaign in 2018, concocted, African gangs, the usual crap that people were talking about back then. We knew through a lot of our research that it was animating the right flank of the coalition. Because you see, if you're predisposed psychologically to have a centre-left view about the world around you, when it comes to law and order, you're going to want, okay, yep, there's a problem, but I also want you to address the societal drivers behind it as well. I don't want just a hammer. I want you to deal with why our young kids are, struggling. So they expect a social response, not a punitive legal police response. And so we knew that as long as we moved to that conversation, Labor will be very comfortable in that debate. Immigration's the same. So when we speak to most Australians, and we did published a poll on the weekend, I did it for an opinion piece in the Fin Review. We asked Australians, what is the main reason why people cannot access a home? So we had price, obviously, wages, planning, all the way down to, I think, number 5 or 6, immigration. But then when we look at the cross types of immigration, the people who chose immigration were largely baby boomers who own their homes outright. Right? They're the ones who chose that option. The majority of Australians are not choosing that as an option because they know, and to quote one person who told it, we were talking about housing in one of our focus groups, and he was probably in his mid-40s, a tradie, not diverse. And he just said, cut it out, as if migrants are the ones responsible for that $2.5 million home down my street that I wouldn't pay, 30 cents to buy because you need a whole bunch of renovation. This is in Sydney. So they know that, their housing market is a product of many things, and blaming migrants is cheap. Yeah.
Yeah, number 5, very interesting.
Yes.
Look, we obviously have a minister at the moment, Minister Anne Ali, who also happens to be the Minister for Small Business. And Melissa Montero, I know that you recently hosted the minister as part of a discussion around small business. I think historically, small businesses and multicultural communities have played a big role. The question here is, again, historically, business has tended to be aligned with Liberal values. Are we seeing something different going on now with CALD communities where you've got 65% voting Labor?
Yeah, and small business in this country is the new working class, right? And that includes those who are running the business and those who and the people that are employed by those small businesses. And it's an area I thought the Conservatives will go into. It's massive tax reform for small business, situating huge numbers in Western Sydney, parts of outer metropolitan Perth, even Darwin. Melbourne, of course, in Melbourne's western suburbs, small business has replaced the big factory floors for diverse communities. But a mixture of conservative political party not pitching into the aspirations of diverse Australians running small business or working in them, and of course racial politics, has created that schism. Yeah. So the only way I think that they connect back into them is they don't have to do anything on the social conservative side of it, because a lot of the diverse communities are very socially conservative, but they are missing their economic narrative and also clearly a narrative of tolerance. These are two pillars that they have not addressed, and I'm a bit surprised, particularly on the small business side, they've not gone there.
Because a question about the media, and I'm sure you deal with these questions about media all the time. Media drives political priorities, curates, biased narratives for citizens. What trends are you seeing in terms of the coverage of multicultural immigration issues and electoral responses that might actually direct voting decisions at local, state and federal levels?
We're going for a bit of a revolution when it comes to the media and media consumption. If you think about last year, 7% of Generation Z read newspapers, and I reckon that's an error margin of 7%. I switched on Channel 7 free to air on Sunday, which I rarely do, and watched the ads. And the ads are like the same sort of ads you'll see on 2GB and 3AW. They're pitched to an older constituency. So even those free-to-air stations know that their market is no longer younger, diverse Australians. So yes, the political class gets animated by the media, but have a look at what Albanese did during the federal election campaign. He probably sat on more podcasts and radio interviews. So I think that world's changing, and it's changing rapidly. And I think that the politicians that don't adjust to that will find themselves completely disconnected from the vast majority of Australians. The other thing we know is that centre that I was talking about, they don't consume political news. They don't consume news. They constantly tell us they do not listen to the news because they find it depressing. And so there's a crisis in that industry because they have relied on what I call trauma, the industry of trauma. Really, it's basically put up a headline that triggers some trauma and you get a click.
Mm.
Majority of younger Australians and even older Australians are switching off it in very big numbers.
It's interesting. Because as I mentioned earlier, we've got a national settlement conference coming up on the Sunshine Coast in mid-November. One of the big conversations is the future of settlement. Are there any insights you can provide us around the kind of narratives we need to be pitching both to the general population but also to government about the value of investing in the settlement eco-structure? Because there is a view, I suppose, that's out there that says why this newly arrived mob getting so much, and why are we putting so much of our money into settling people? Shouldn't we be getting people with better integration potential, is a word that I'm hearing. Any thoughts around that?
Where are you going to get them from?
Yeah.
Right? Where are you
Yeah.
going to get them from? So we have an aging population that requires a significant health workforce that needs to be imported into this country. And they are overwhelmingly from diverse diasporas. They're not coming from New Zealand. There is a small group, a tiny number from the UK, because they're obviously, that's very small numbers. So the type of workforce that we need in this country to staff our hospitals, our aged care centres, ensure the lights stay on, have to be brought into the country because our breeding numbers are too low.
Yeah.
Well, they were too low 20 years ago. So our population problem exists today, right? And so your organisation's response should be, unless you invest in settlement, in helping these communities come over and settle into, for example, outer urban areas of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and so on, you're going to have a crisis in your health system and your aged care system. And we know that in Western Sydney right now, biggest problem they've got, young nurses can't move. They're losing young nurses in huge numbers because their rental market's too expensive. People cannot live around the hospitals they work, so they are leaving the industry or moving cities, and they're coming to Melbourne and they're going to Brisbane. So absolutely critical conversation. If you want to sustain your aging population, particularly your regional white aging population, which will have massive critical needs. Yeah, the median age of some of these regional towns I'm talking about is 55 right now. That's like, it's crazy. Like out of suburban Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane, is median age is 32, right? So we're dealing with very old aging population clusters that don't have younger workers present to service their needs. And the only way you can fix it is for a migrant population that you're going to bring in and you're going to assist in settling. That's it, right?
Wow. I think you just called me old, Cosmos, but I'll let that one through.
Mate, I'm old too.
Hey, I'm very conscious of time, but I did hear you speak at the recent Social Cohesion, the Scanlon Foundation conference, and you talked about faith communities, and I understand you might be doing some more research into that. Anything you want to tell us?
Yeah, I mean, basically, people can be religious and socially conservative, and they want to be able to practice their religion and culture in this country without being harassed and isolated for it. And it is also a driver of a lot of, I would say, social fragmentation and anxiety, particularly within the Muslim community. That's clearly a problem. We spent a lot of time speaking, particularly young Muslim Australians, over the last 2 years. And, I think the federal Labor government's gotten a little bit better in that space. But, clearly a lot of the political fragmentation I've been talking about is driven by young, diverse Australians. You know, the median age for Diley's vote in Fowler is 28, and it's diverse. They tactically voted for her. They knew she was going to stop the Labor candidate, and so they voted for her in huge numbers. Whenever we see political upheaval from the ballot box perspective within diverse communities, it's younger, diverse Australians who are religious and feel victimised.
Yeah, no, and it's certainly an important point. Look, one more final question. The narrative around crime, if it continues to get the kind of media and other attention that it's receiving, what do you see as being the impact?
I would expect for example, Victoria being the epicenter of that problem. The response from Labor governments has to be, and it has to be because this is what the community is demanding. All of the constituencies I've been talking about in this presentation, young professionals, diverse Australians, whatever, they expect a social response as well. They understand you've got to put some, you know, you've got to deal with the sentencing issue and repeat offenders and so on. But they want a Labor government to respond socially to address the underlying causes. And I think that's where they're going to go. I think if there's going to be a response, whether it's in Victoria, New South Wales, anywhere else, it won't be the LNP approach. It will be one that is demanded by the community. That yes, okay, you've got to deal with the law and order issue, but you're going to have to deal with also the reason why our kids are in this mess.
Because there's a multitude of expressions of gratitude for your wisdom and your insight. I get the feeling we could spend many more hours trying to extract this data from your head. You just seem to be able to carry it so well and then just share it in ways that are so accessible. Excellent presentation. Thank you, Cosmos. So on and so on. I actually, Priscilla, if you don't mind, I'm going to read this quote because I think it's a good one. If the diagnosis is a fracture, what is a unified message or story that the multicultural sector needs to tell our political workforce as we go into the conference? Cos, what should we all be saying as the settlement sector to our politicians?
Australia's future cannot be sustained without diverse Australians. And I touched on the aged care demand that's heading down the pipeline. All the acute problems that a country is going to face, it needs diverse Australians. Cannot function without it. And the irony is Robert Menzies understood that a long time ago, right? And they had a crisis back then. They knew they actually had to do something about it. We have a crisis now. We're going to have an aged care crisis. We're going to have an aging population that needs acute support. And we have a regional Australian community that is declining in the services it can access. So yes, there's no future in Australia without diverse Australians.
No future in Australia without diverse Australians. A great way to end the session. Kos Samaras, I'm deeply grateful, and on behalf of the Settlement Council, thank you so much. We look forward to having ongoing conversations with you if you're open to it. Thank you to all of you for joining this very important seminar. See you at the conference. Kos, thank you.
Ciao.
Go well, everyone.